Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Dustin Kramer, and I'm the creator of From Camera to Console, a web series about movie tie-in games I began in September of 2020 in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. When I started this show, I had been working from home for several months already and realized I had some extra time to focus on more personal creative projects. This series is something I had been pondering for nearly 3 years at that point, the earliest draft of my very first episode featuring Tron Deadly Discs, dating all the way back to October of 2017. I'm a videographer and editor by trade, which is partially why you're watching this instead of, say, reading or listening to it, although I have done my fair share of writing and podcasting.
We are the Popcorn Poops. Welcome to Popcorn Poops, the best married couple movie podcast / commentary track hybrid audio program on the internet.
But why video? Well, it's what I got my degree in, but it wasn't always my major. I started college as a student of the studio arts in the hopes of one day becoming an illustrator. So what happened? Movies. I fell in love with cinema. And if I had to pinpoint one movie, my Rosetta Stone of sorts, that blew the doors wide open on the whole thing, I'd be lying if I didn't say it was Kevin Smith's Clerks from 1994. What I saw in Smith's cult comedy classic was an actual, for real movie that felt handmade, and perhaps not out of reach for someone like, well, me. So I ditched my art program for one in communications so I could learn how to operate a camera and edit video. So in a long roundabout sort of way, you can blame Kevin Smith for the existence of From Camera to Console. And in the spirit of that notion, we're going to take a look at a game based on Smith's two most enduring characters. Although this title came out more than 25 years after their first film appearance, if you didn't know better, you might think this is some long-lost classic. Kevin Smith was born and raised in Highlands, New Jersey. As a young fan of movies and comic books with a dream of one day becoming a writer, Smith developed a love of stories at an early age.
I wrote a short story that my brother read about going to the relatives. He read it and laughed, and I was just like, ooh, you know, I kind of dug it. I wrote something, he read it, he laughed. You know, it made sense to me. Simple equation.
But on his 21st birthday, a new seed was planted. A positive review in the Village Voice for a film called Slacker led Smith into New York City to catch one of its limited screenings. The movie was made by a filmmaker named Richard Linklater and was unlike anything Smith had ever seen. The film depicts a day in the life of a number of 20-somethings in Austin, Texas. Hopping around the city from one conversation to another, the formless vignette-like structure showed Smith a different kind of movie. One that didn't need a strong plot or series of action set pieces, but rather just a few fun characters and some interesting dialogue. This was something that he could do, and now he wanted to. Kevin Smith wanted to become a filmmaker. Leaving his New Jersey home, Smith attended Vancouver Film School in British Columbia, where he met Scott Mosier, a young man who would help shape his life and career. However, Smith's tenure at the college would be short-lived. He dropped out after only 4 months in order to put the partial tuition refund into the making of a film. Mosier stayed behind to finish the program, but promised to help Smith with his movie when he was done. Smith returned to Highlands to write the script for what would become his first, and perhaps only, feature film. The plot, or lack thereof, would emulate Linklater's Slacker, taking place over the course of a single day and depicting a series of largely disconnected interactions, only this time following a small group of main characters. Smith got permission from the owners of the convenience store where he worked to shoot the movie there during closing hours. As promised, Scott Mosier came to New Jersey, degree in hand, to produce the screenplay. Along for the ride was their Vancouver classmate David Klein, who would act as cinematographer. Together, they formed View Askew Productions. Maxing out a number of credit cards to the tune of $28,000, Smith was able to rent equipment and buy film stock. Casting friends and local community theater actors, the production began to take shape. Shooting over 21 straight days in March of 1993, the cast and crew got very little sleep as they worked every night to see Smith's vision fulfilled while still having day jobs to perform. Smith and Mosier edited the 16mm film in the adjoining video store, and when they were done, they had something they could rightfully call a movie. The title? Clerks. The story follows Dante Hicks, a world-weary quick-stop clerk who's called into work on his day off. He struggles with relationship problems and an overall sense of directionlessness in his life. In contrast to him is Randall Graves, Dante's carefree, borderline misanthropic best friend who works next door at the RST video store. From opening to closing, the pair deals with everything from contentious customers to the drug-dealing duo of Jay and Silent Bob who loiter outside their workplace. Taking every opportunity to shirk the responsibilities of their jobs, including playing hockey on the roof and attending a wake for a high school friend, it isn't until Dante's ex-girlfriend unexpectedly walks back into his life that he must make a decision about what path he's going to take moving forward. 7 months and a $500 entry fee later, the public would get their first opportunity to see the fruits of the young filmmaker's labor. Clerks screened early one Sunday morning at the Angelica Film Center in Manhattan as a part of the independent feature film market. Eager to see how the comedy would play with the crowd, Smith and company were devastated to find the theater almost empty. Little did they know, however, that one of the few in attendance would help take Smith's career to the next level.
My whole feeling about convenience stores is that they are a metaphor for our society today. And I circled it in my schedule, and that was where I was going to be.
Bob Hawke did what he could to get word out about the scrappy little comedy. In a stroke of serendipity, Amy Taubin, the film critic who wrote the review of Slacker that put Smith on his path toward Hollywood, wrote a glowing review of Clerks for the Village Voice, calling it the undiscovered gem of the marketplace. But Bob Hawke wasn't quite done exerting his influence over the young filmmaker's career.
I was on the advisory selection committee of the Sundance Film Festival, and so I had already told them, I saw this film, Clerks, it's something you all have to see.
Thanks to Hawke, Clerks would screen in Park City, Utah, where its fate would be made, for better or worse. Fortunately, during the movie's final screening at Sundance, it caught the attention of an executive at Miramax, who approached Smith about purchasing the film for distribution. The studio poured $230,000 into additional post-production work, including licensing music for a hip soundtrack featuring bands such as Alice in Chains and Soul Asylum. Although Clerks never played in more than 50 theaters during its initial release, it managed to gross more than $3 million in the United States. The success of Smith's first feature brought Universal Pictures to his door, offering to finance his sophomore effort. With a budget of $6.1 million this time around, Mosier returned to produce Smith's screenplay for a movie called Mallrats. The picture would serve as a sort of sequel to Clerks, bringing back secondary characters such as Jay and Silent Bob, but following a different pair of young men in their mid-20s. Brody and T.S. have both been recently broken up with by their girlfriends. Going to the local mall, they discover that T.S.'s ex, Brandy, will be appearing on her father's dating game show, which is being filmed at the very same shopping center. The friends approach Jay and Silent Bob about destroying the game show's set to sabotage the whole affair. When these attempts fail, Jay instead incapacitates two of the game show contestants with a little herbal assistance, allowing T.S. and Brody to take their place. The film's climax has T.S. rekindling his relationship with Brandy live on air. Unlike Clerks, Mallrats was a flop, both critically and at the box office, making back only a third of its budget. This didn't mark the end of Smith's career, however. The filmmaker returned to Miramax and to a much more modest production budget to make Chasing Amy, the third part of what was then being called his Jersey trilogy. He followed this up with 2 more entries in what came to be known as the View Askewniverse franchise before trying his hand at a movie without a requisite appearance by Jay and Silent Bob. However, the failure of Jersey Girl brought Smith back to the View Askewniverse to make a direct sequel to Clerks in 2006. Over the years, the filmmaker has added a number of job titles to his resume: podcaster, author, stand-up comedian. He's even fulfilled his childhood dream of writing comic books. And though he's continued to make films since Clerks 2 was released, View Askewniverse fans would have to wait 13 years for another Smith-directed entry in the franchise, 2019's Jay and Silent Bob reboot. Smith's flagship series has spawned toys, comics, pop-up promotional restaurants, and brick-and-mortar stores, the setting of which was used for a 7-season reality show called Comic Book Men, featuring Smith and a number of his longtime friends. Apart from a pair of mobile games that landed on iOS devices in 2012, the View Askewniverse had yet to dip its toes in the realm of interactive media until independent developer Interabang Entertainment approached Kevin Smith about making a Jay and Silent Bob video game. With his blessing, the studio launched a crowdfunding campaign in February of 2016 for what they called a side-scrolling tag team beat-em-up titled Jay and Silent Bob Chronic Blunt Punch. Reaching their $400,000 goal in just over 1 month, the studio could finally guarantee that the passion project would eventually see the light of day. But with a small team, the process would take time. More than 3 years after hitting their crowdfunding goal, Interrobang decided it was time to give back to their supporters who had been waiting so patiently. In May of 2019, the studio announced that they were teaming up with Spoony Bard Productions to develop a supplemental game to Chronic Blunt Punch that would have a quick production cycle and perhaps tide gamers over until the main game was complete. This side project would feature 8-bit style graphics and gameplay reminiscent of NES beat-em-ups such as Double Dragon and River City Ransom. This might sound familiar, as it's almost identical to the move made by developers of Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, who fulfilled the promise of a second NES-style game once they surpassed their funding goal to a certain benchmark. That promise resulted in the companion title Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. However, the cherry on top of the Chronic Blunt Punch bonus game is one that Bloodstained can't claim. Not only would the game be released digitally on Steam and the Nintendo Switch storefronts, but also physically on both the Switch and, believe it or not, the Nintendo Entertainment System. With the as-yet unreleased Chronic Blunt Punch still in development, the supplemental bonus game hit digital shops on May 7th, 2020. So let's take a look at Jay and Silent Bob Mall Brawl. The game kicks off with a nod to Final Fantasy, white text on a blue background, setting up an alternate continuation of the plot to Mallrats, in which Jay and Silent Bob have successfully sabotaged the Truth or Date game show. Now, they must escape the mall and make their way back to their home base in front of Quick Stop and RST Video. The first level drops players near the Truth or Date set, taking them backstage to contend with security guards, janitors, disgruntled hockey players, leaping children, and the Easter Bunny, calling back to the assault of the egg-hawking rabbit in Smith's second film. The boss of this stage is LaForce, the villainous mall cop from the movie. Moving forward, the player will work their way down the shopping center's corridors, passing fictional businesses that should be familiar to fans of Mallrats. Along the way, players do battle with new enemy types such as skateboarders, generic punks, and Mooby, the bovine fast food mascot from the Viewisk universe. This area's boss is something of a deep cut. Patrick Swayze on horseback, a character voiced by Gilbert Gottfried from the short-lived Clerks animated series, bursts forth from the pet shop to fight. Victory in this battle puts the player in the food court to go up against a few new baddies. The ice cream clerk is something of a welcome foe, as they are guaranteed to drop a healing food item, much like the Easter Bunny and Mooby. Adobo is a tough new enemy type based on the character Abobo from the Double Dragon games. The end of the stage doesn't feature a boss fight like all the others, but rather something much more difficult. The player hops into a shopping cart to zoom through what appears to be a grocery store section of the mall. This part is very reminiscent of the notorious Turbo Tunnel from the third level of Battletoads for NES. Speed along the path, avoiding puddles, bananas, barrels, fruit carts, and shoppers to reach the goal. And try not to pull your hair out. Mercifully, the following stage is a standalone boss battle. My bet is that the developers realized how unforgiving it would be to put an end-stage combat challenge after the gauntlet of the shopping cart section. So, Chapter 4 has the player simply go up against the Excremental, aka the Golgothan, aka the Poop Demon, from Kevin Smith's fourth film, Dogma. The only way to defeat this foul creature is by hitting it with plungers that appear periodically on the playfield. Flush this bad guy down the toilet and you'll be moving on to a stalwart of any mall in the 80s and 90s, the arcade, complete with that wild carpet pattern that any child of the era should remember. The only new enemy type here is the Ninja, the first opponent with a projectile weapon that the player has yet faced. Eagle-eyed gamers will spot a reference to Interrobang's very first game, Super Combo Man, in the background. In order to proceed to the next level, players will have to defeat a hockey player on a giant air hockey table. Knock the pucks back at him and you'll be on your way before long. Next up, the lingerie store. Here, Jay and Bob will encounter some familiar faces, along with a new enemy, the angry young woman, who probably has a good reason for beating up on our heroes. You'll also run into a couple more characters from Clerks the Animated Series, namely Leonardo and his assistant Plug, inspired by henchman Oddjob from the James Bond films. The end of this stage features a rush of tougher enemies inside the confined space of an elevator, concluding with a bout against evil doppelgangers of Jay and Silent Bob themselves. An obvious callback to enemies such as Dark Link from Zelda 2, the evil duo boasts movesets similar to the player character, but with one diabolical addition: laser eyes. Get their health bar low enough and they will escape before being defeated. Chapter 7 takes place in the comic shop, what sign sports a lovely tribute to the late Marvel mastermind Stan Lee. Work your way through this area and you will eventually run into the arch nemesis of Jay and Silent Bob's superhero alter egos, Bluntman and Chronic. I do my best to keep this show PG rated, so I'll avoid saying his name, but just know that he's the infamous crotch-clobbering villain played by Mark Hamill in Smith's 2001 film, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Cockknocker. His name is Cockknocker. And that's it. You're out of the mall. But this adventure isn't quite over yet. On the way back to the quick stop, Jay and Bob will have to face a boss rush of all previous end-stage enemies, with a few mini-bosses thrown in for good measure. Finally, you'll arrive at your destination, the place that started it all, Quick Stop and RST Video. Nega Jay and Nega Bob are back and ready to rumble, but facing this dark duo is only the first part of this final battle. Once defeated, the pair will merge into a one-eyed amorphous blob that zooms across the screen, fires lasers, and rains down lightning bolts. Some evasive maneuvers and a whole bunch of punches and kicks will reveal who the true enemy has been this entire time. Dante and Randall, who would love nothing more than to see Jay and Silent Bob stop loitering, selling drugs, and harassing women outside their places of business. A brief scuffle with the clerks will earn the titular pair the right to resume their post against the outer wall. Congratulations, you've completed Jay and Silent Bob Mall Brawl. Stick around after the staff roll for a promise that Chronic Blunt Punch is coming. At some point. Just like in the games from which it was inspired, players can move along both axes, utilizing punches, kicks, and jumps to string together combos. A successful combo will earn the player a star, allowing them to perform a powerful special move. This special move is activated at the end of a successful punch combo for Silent Bob and a kick combo for Jay. 3 stars may be banked to use at the player's discretion for particularly difficult sections. A charging attack will knock an enemy down, and a stunned enemy can be grappled and thrown. Some enemies wield weapons. Just like in classic beat-em-ups, they can be disarmed, allowing the player to pick up and use their weapon against them for some extra damage. Items of this kind include brooms, chains, baseball bats, skateboards, the aforementioned plunger, and a sock full of quarters, yet another reference to Mallrats. As mentioned before, pickups also include foods such as hamburgers, chicken legs, and ice cream cones that can heal the player character. These may appear from a defeated enemy, a smashable box, or from helpful mall denizens who drop a number of food items as they slowly make their way across the screen. Be careful not to attack these allies, or you'll have a couple of enemies to take down that you wouldn't have to deal with otherwise. Mall Brawl features local cooperative play, so you and a buddy can step into the shoes of Jay and Silent Bob and take on all 9 stages as a team. If one player falls in battle, worry not. As long as the remaining player stays alive and is currently engaged in fighting, their cohort's health will slowly recharge, reviving them once the bar is half full. If both characters die, however, you will be sent back to the beginning of the level. In single player, you may switch back and forth between the 2 characters at any time. Even in this mode, Jay and Bob have their own life bars. If your standby character has less than half life, they will recharge health until it reaches halfway, whether or not they have died. If one character does die, however, he becomes unusable until the halfway health recharge, just like in co-op mode. This actually makes the game a lot easier by yourself, because as long as you switch out your character before they die, the remaining character will always be regaining health, at least to the halfway mark. Speaking of difficulty, Jay and Silent Bob Mall Brawl is not what you would call easy. Enemies are extremely aggressive, and it's not uncommon to get ganged up on and totally incapacitated. The game's only checkpoints are at the beginning of each stage, so if you reach the boss and lose, you'll have to do the whole level over again. In an act of mercy by the devs, the aforementioned health regeneration system and infinite continues make completing the game feel very doable. But this throwback title should remind a dyed-in-the-wool classic gamer why we used to refer to games from this era as Nintendo hard. Which is why I find it totally appropriate that you can play this game on an actual Nintendo Entertainment System. Along with a physical release for Switch, Limited Run Games offered a fully playable Special Edition NES cartridge of Jay and Silent Bob Mall Brawl in yellow, green, and classic gray shells. Functionally conceived as an NES-style brawler with all of the technological and aesthetic qualities and limitations that entails, Mall Brawl is virtually identical, whether played on a modern console or with the Special Edition cartridge. Like I said earlier, if you didn't know this was a recent release, I could understand believing that this game was developed 30 plus years ago. It doesn't just feel like an NES game, it is an NES game, just one that came out in 2020. And if you missed your opportunity to grab the cartridge from Limited Run, a more authentic experience is not out of reach. The Switch and Steam versions do include a couple of video filters that imitate the look of playing on an old CRT monitor, as well as a border that looks like a tube TV. But this isn't exactly what I'm talking about when I say a more authentic experience. Playing the game with the official wireless NES controller for Switch is a great way to approximate how the game plays on vintage hardware. Be warned, however, as the NES controller has only 2 action buttons, you'll have to press both A and B simultaneously to perform a jump, just like in Double Dragon and River City Ransom. It's for this reason that I chose to play with the official wireless SNES controller for Switch, as jump is mapped to a dedicated input. This will also work with similar controllers from manufacturers such as 8BitDo. However you feel about approximating the authenticity of your playthrough, I would say a good D-pad at the very least is essential. The sprite designs are adorably reminiscent of the game's 2 primary influences, the Kunio-kun and Double Dragon series, and the backgrounds are vibrant and detailed, filled with references to the View-Askew universe. The music by Tony Lays is wonderful and will easily slide into my personal rotation of chiptune tracks. The game is relatively simple, with no real surprises in mechanics or fundamental gameplay changes as you make your way through this adventure. The outlier here, of course, is the shopping cart level, which alone is more frustrating than laudable. But truly, that difficulty is part and parcel of the classic gaming experience. Those who really want to seek a challenge will be glad to hear that completing the game unlocks a harder mode in which the health of your standby character doesn't recharge. I don't think I have the wherewithal to tackle that myself, but it's nice that it's there for people who value a little replayability. But if you're looking for a modern interpretation of 8 and 16-bit generation games such as Shovel Knight or The Messenger that sand down the rough edges of early gaming for a more broadly palatable experience, you'll have to look elsewhere. This one is true to its inspiration, warts and all. The care and passion clearly put into Jay and Silent Bob Mall Brawl to make a game that's not only true to the spirit of the View-Askew universe, but to classic beat-em-ups as well, should be more than enough to interest fans of one or both facets of this title. And just like Bloodstained Curse of the Moon whetted my appetite for Ritual of the Night, I can now say I am looking forward to Chronic Blunt Punch in a way I wasn't before. Kevin Smith's work spoke to me at a time and a place in my life where I needed to see that art can be whatever an artist wants it to be, just like Linklater's Slacker did for him. You can learn to define and redefine your own notions of what is allowed in art from countless places. I learned it from a filmmaker from New Jersey, and I'll always be grateful to him for helping to shape the person I am today. This one's for you, Kev. Snooch to the nooch.